Hey y'all, I've been seeing a lot of questions and discussion about battery types, what type of auxiliary batteries to use to power your bus. And so I just wanted to take a second and discuss a few of the options and the pros and cons. Um, and I'll be using as a resource my solar components background guide, which is on my website, less.people.com. And it has a small section here about power sources. So the type of battery that you're going to need to power your life, I guess, is called a deep cycle battery. And this battery is different from, say, like cold cranking batteries, which is the type which is in your car, whereas those type of batteries are meant to put out a high amount of power for short bursts. Deep cycle batteries are the type of batteries that are designed to be deeply discharged and then recharged over and over and over again. So so when it comes to price variation, the biggest thing that's going to determine, well, it's two things. So the first thing that's going to determine the price of your battery or the cost of your battery is the capacity. So all batteries have their own capacity, which is usually measured in amp hours. Sometimes you'll see it measured in watt hours. In which case, all you got to do is take that watt hour number and divide it by the voltage of the battery, and that will give you the amp hours. So that'll give you a standard to apply to every battery you look at, since sometimes they will be shown in watt hours and it can get confusing if you see a battery that's 1,000 watt hours versus a battery that's like 100 amp hours. It sounds like there's a big difference in size in those two batteries, but there's actually not once you do the conversion. Depending on the voltage, of course. So always pay attention to voltage and do those conversions when you compare batteries so that you're looking at one standard unit of measurement across the board and you're not getting ripped off, basically. For now, I just kind of want to talk about the different types of batteries that are out there. So you've got sealed lead acid, which is the battery that most people are familiar with. That's the kind of battery that's in your car. They're big, they're heavy, they have a lot of liquid in them. And generally those are going to be the cheapest type of battery chemistry you can buy. But the catch there is that they have a significantly shorter lifespan of charge cycles, so they can be charged and discharged. The average lifespan is probably between 200 and maybe like 500 or 600 cycles. So you got to keep an eye on that when you're buying a battery. And also, it's unsafe to discharge them below 50%, meaning if you discharge them below 50%, you're probably going to damage your battery. So if I see a 100 amp hour lead acid battery, that's going to give me only 50 amp hours of usable power that I can use without damaging that battery. So it might look like a great deal, but considering that, it might not be such a great deal. And then there are also gel mat batteries, which size-wise and weight-wise they're lighter than lead acid, but they're still pretty heavy and they're still pretty large. But they do have a longer lifespan. And I believe you can't discharge those below 50% either. Someone please correct me if I'm wrong. And then we come to the lithium batteries, where we have lithium ion and lithium iron, or LiFePO4. So lithium ion, a lot of us are familiar with. That's what's in our phone. Lithium iron is very much like lithium ion, but it's more stable. So it's less likely to catch fire or combust. I know we've all remember when like the Samsung phones were catching on fire and you couldn't bring them on planes. So that was lithium ion. And we have lithium iron, which you can really, really overcharge it, and it's really hard to get it to catch on fire. Lithium batteries are significantly smaller and lighter than lead acid or AGM batteries. And the great thing about them is you can discharge them way lower. So you're not bound to that 50% charge. You can go down to 15%, and even below that, although it is going to shorten the lifespan of your battery if you're draining it to absolute zero, and you could potentially damage it. So you want to probably stay in that sweet range of between like 15 and 85 to 90% charge and discharge. But so it goes to show that you could potentially get a cheaper lead acid battery that is 100 amp hours, but of that 100 amp hours, you can only safely use 50, where you might get a more expensive 50 amp hour lithium battery and you can use, say 45 amp hours. So that's something to consider. And then the lifespan, these batteries are rated a lot of times up to like 10,000 charge cycles, but that does vary per battery, so you want to keep an eye on that. And one other side note of something to keep an eye on, especially if you plan to run very high demand, high energy demand appliances, is your C rating. And a C rating basically rates how much of a battery's power it can output at a given time. So say if I have a 200 amp hour battery, if it has a 1C rating, it can put out as much as 200 amp hours at a time. Whereas there are some batteries which might be a lot cheaper, but it's only got a 0.5C rating, meaning a 200 amp hour battery could only put out 100 amp hours at a time. So you want to make sure that if you're going to need to be pulling a lot of power at once, then you're probably going to want to keep an eye on your C rating to make sure that you're able to supply that power. Just having and being able to store it doesn't necessarily mean you can pull all of that power out at once. And it's dependent on, the components that are inside the battery, the wires, the fuses. And so if you see a battery that's inexplicably cheap with a good capacity and the chemistry that you want, I might check the C rating. Yeah, I hope this is some useful information for someone out there. This is just kind of like a basic overview of some different battery types and some things that might influence your choices. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them below. Thanks, take care, guys.